Welcome to Primetime Weekend. I'm Nicole Wallace. Let's get right to the week's top stories.
Each of you know what it means to stare down danger and summon the strength in the moment of trial. We're grateful for all that you three have done, so many more.
Of all the privileges of this office, none is greater than serving as the Commander-in-Chief of the finest military that the world has ever known. And of all the military decorations that our nation can bestow, we have none higher than the Medal of Honor.
When you meet a veteran who wears that medal, remember the moment, because you are looking at one of the bravest ever to wear our country's uniform.
Today we recognize 7 men as being among the bravest of the brave. Each of them distinguished himself with extraordinary valor. In the famous words, at the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty.
The highest military honor one can receive is the Medal of Honor, bestowed by the Commander-in-Chief to individuals who exhibit extraordinary bravery in combat, who in some cases make the ultimate sacrifice. This highest honor for valor has been awarded to just 3,519 recipients out of the more than 41 million individuals who have served our country. Among those remarkable recipients are Desmond Doss, a World War II Army medic who put himself in danger to help wounded soldiers. He rescued 75 men trapped at the top of a cliff. Staff Sergeant Ronald J. Schur II. He saved several soldiers when they went under attack from machine gun and sniper fire in Afghanistan. No one died in the attack because of his valiant efforts. Milton L. Olive III was the first African-American soldier to receive this honor. At the age of 18, he sacrificed his life to save others by falling on a grenade. Mary Edwards Walker was an acting assistant surgeon during the Civil War and the only female recipient of the Medal of Honor. Commander Howard Gilmore was killed in action during World War II when his submarine was under attack. When he realized he could not get back into the vessel in time for it to escape, he yelled, "Take her down," and sacrificed himself. And there's a face familiar to all of you. Retired U.S. Army Colonel Jack Jacobs. During the Vietnam War, with impaired vision from injuries, he pulled 14 men to safety while he was under enemy fire. With all of that fresh in your mind, listen to what Donald Trump, the Republican nominee for president, said out loud with cameras rolling last night at a fundraiser at his golf club. He was speaking about awarding Miriam Adelson. She's the widow of GOP megadonor Sheldon Adelson with the nation's highest civilian honor.
I have to say, Miriam, I watched Sheldon sitting so proud in the White House when we gave Miriam the Presidential Medal of Freedom. That's the highest award you can get as a civilian. It's the equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor, but civilian version. It's actually much better because everyone gets the Congressional Medal of Honor. That's soldiers. They're either in very bad shape because they've been hit so many times by bullets, or they're dead. She gets it, and she's a healthy, beautiful woman.
So again, not a gotcha moment, nothing caught on secret hidden camera. Public statements, a disgusting and shameful display from anyone, but especially someone who wants to be our country's commander-in-chief. It's a flagrant display of disrespect to the men and women who put their lives on the line and commit heroic acts on the battlefield to protect all of us and our way of life. Friend of this show and retired Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Amy McGrath put it this way, quote, "No, the Medal of Honor is not the equivalent of the medal Trump gave to Rush Limbaugh and Jim Jordan. No, they're not rated equal, not even close. Every single member of the military knows the significance of the Medal of Honor. Every single commander-in-chief in the history of America knows the significance of this medal, except Donald Trump." And as galling as his comments are, at this point, they're not surprising, given the ex-president's long history of disparaging our veterans, publicly and privately. His chief of staff confirmed that he called those who fought for our country suckers and losers. He questioned why someone would serve in the United States military. And he even criticized former Senator John McCain, a prisoner of war, for being captured. This is who Donald Trump really is. And this is where we start the hour with some of our favorite military experts and friends. Medal of Honor recipient and retired Army Colonel Jack Jacobs is here with us, along with retired four-star general and MSNBC military analyst Barry McCaffrey, plus retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel and founder of Democratic Majority Action PAC, the aforementioned Amy McGrath, and the host of the Independent Americans podcast, founder and CEO of the Independent Veterans of America, and founder of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Paul Rieckhoff is here. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for your service. I can't believe we have to have this conversation, Colonel Jack, but here we are. I guess what I want to ask you is, do your peers, do the men and women, do veterans, do the men and women of the military understand that Donald Trump not only doesn't respect them, but really does see them as suckers and losers?
Well, many do, but many don't. Despite the fact that Donald Trump is one of the most inept public speakers I've heard, and I'm an old person, so I've been around a great deal. I've heard a great number of public speakers, and you often don't know what it is he's saying, not convinced that he knows what it is he's saying, very digressive and so on, and drifted off into castigating people who have served and sacrificed and can't tell a difference between the Medal of Freedom and the Medal of Honor. We have to remember that this is the man who, as you said, denigrated people who served and sacrificed so that he could enjoy the freedom that he enjoys now. And if it weren't for these people, he wouldn't be in the position where he could enjoy, and all of us wouldn't be in the position where we could enjoy freedom. The other thing to keep in mind is that this is also the guy who managed to avoid serving because of his really deleterious heel spur on his foot. All that notwithstanding, the problem in this regard is that Donald Trump does not understand some of the things which in history have described how we get to a position where we can have freedom. That is through the service and sacrifice of others. I'm reminded of the observation of Hillel, that first century Hebrew scholar who wrote, "If I am only for myself, what am I?" Well, if you are only for yourself, you're probably Donald Trump. Or the observation, almost as poignantly, of John Stuart Mill, who wrote about war. Trump ought to like him because he was something of an individualist and a libertarian, who wrote that a man for whom nothing is more important than his own safety is a miserable creature who is made free and kept free by better men than he. Nicole?
I love that. Colonel Jack, you might be mad at me for doing this, but I'm going to do two things. I'm going to show our viewers some of the video of when President Nixon awarded you this medal, and I'm going to share a little bit more of the history of your service. Your battalion came under intense heavy machine gun and mortar fire from a Viet Cong battalion. And as we said before, even though you were wounded by mortar fragments, you assumed command of the Allied company, ordered a withdrawal from the exposed position, established a defensive perimeter, and despite your own wounds, profuse bleeding from head wounds, which impaired your vision, with disregard for your own safety, you returned intense fire to evacuate a seriously wounded advisor to the safety of a wooded area where you administered life-saving first aid. You then returned through heavy automatic weapons fire to evacuate the wounded company commander. You made repeated trips across the fire-swept open rice paddies, evacuating wounded and their weapons. Your actions saved the lives of a U.S. advisor and 13 Allied soldiers. We don't read all. Brian Williams probably did, and that's one of the many reasons we miss him. But we don't read all that every time we ask for your advice. But some of what I worry about many things when I worry about Donald Trump, but I worry about the erasure of selflessness. And I worry that what Donald Trump normalizes in his disgust of veterans and of those who lose their lives. I mean, one of the most harrowing things I think I read during his whole presidency was that he stood with General Kelly and didn't understand basically his pride in having a son who sacrificed, who lost his life serving the country. He sees people who put something other than themselves above self-interest as suckers and losers. That's his word. What do we do as a country with the fact that he's been elevated a third time, that an entire political party elevated somebody who sees service that way?
Well, we all have to do a much better job of educating not only this generation, the people who are voting now, but future generations about the importance of democracy and how costly it is to get it and to keep it. Listen, you're looking at somebody who believes in universal service. I think anybody who's lucky enough to live in a free country owes it something in the form of service. And it's only until we have a system in which everybody has to make a contribution to freedom that we will value those things and therefore reject those who think that people who serve and sacrifice are losers. Those of us who've served in combat, General McCaffrey and everybody else who's been in uniform, but particularly those who've served in combat, understand how important it is that we take care of each other. That's how we defeat the enemy and we come home and we preserve freedom. Unless we can educate future generations about the importance of doing that is the route to freedom, we will always be at risk. In this situation, we'll be at risk. We will be at risk from demagogues who try to negate the efforts of those who made this country great and who will keep it great. Education is the only way that we can reach into the future, and we have to do a much better job of educating our future generations, Nicole.
General McCaffrey, you too may be mad at me at the end of this segment, but I'm going to do this. You received 3 Purple Heart medals for injuries sustained during your service in the Vietnam War, 2 Silver Stars, and 2 Distinguished Service Crosses, the second highest United States Army award for valor. And I guess part of the reason I want to remind all of our viewers of your contributions to our country is because I truly find it terrifying that someone has been elevated by the voters, again, of one of the 2 parties, who, again, would redefine heroism and patriotism and service to mean that Sheldon Adelson's wife is the same as you and Colonel Jack. I find that offensive to the point of being disoriented by it as an American.
Yeah. By the way, one of the better stories about Jack Jacobs is not only the Medal of Honor recipient piece, but he insisted on going back to Vietnam at the end of the war. The Army liked to keep our few living Medal of Honor recipients alive. When he got back there, his helicopter was shot down. He was darn near killed, rejoining his unit. So it's an interesting sort of record Jack has in public. Look, the Medal of Freedom's a distinguished, glorious award to recognize science, medicine, athletes, artists, musicians. It's a terrific award. And the recipient that Trump was talking about in public is a distinguished Israeli-American physician who has a salient aspect to her bio that she's worth $28 billion, and she funds Trump. So we ought to put that aside. But look, at the end of the day, Mr. Trump and that sort of incoherent babble talk, it was hard to sort out what he was really saying, is someone who has no understanding of public service. It's just foreign to his idea. At one point, he told Howard Stern in a radio interview that he deserved the Medal of Honor for not getting an STD during Vietnam. So there's a comical, dissolute aspect to the man that really is shocking, as you point out.
General McCaffrey, you tweeted this: "It's impossible to believe that Trump as a presidential candidate could sound this ignorant. Disordered language, incoherent thinking, 5th grade stuff." Yes, and there's such a long line now of insults for the men and women of the military, not going to the cemetery in Paris, not wanting wounded veterans to be seen at ceremonies because, quote, nobody wants to see that. The losers and suckers, the insults for John McCain, the insults for George Bush the first. I mean, at what point do we really settle into and understand that he has disdain for the men and women of the military?
It's a world turned upside down. It's hard for me to even follow the bouncing ball on this. General John Kelly, Marine 4-star, enlisted Marine, made Staff Sergeant in the Marine Corps, combat veteran, lost his son, a young Marine lieutenant in combat in Afghanistan. He's the one that stepped forward and said publicly, look, this guy didn't want to go to the cemetery in Europe, nor in Arlington, and asked what would their motivation be to sacrifice their life for this country. So we got to believe that that's actually what Trump said, and that's what he believes and thinks. And in my judgment, it makes him unqualified to be the president of the United States. I think a lot of veterans, though, as Jack pointed out, are supporting Trump, and they're blocking out this message for a variety of reasons, which the Democratic Party better figure out why that is. Because on the face of it, he's incoherent, he's unqualified, he's ignorant. This is childish stuff. And that's who's running for president for the Republican Party now. It's a bad situation for all of us.
All right, no one's going anywhere. We have much more with our panel as Donald Trump demonstrates once again and again and again his disrespect and disdain for those who put on the uniform for our country and in some cases have made the ultimate sacrifice.
I am damn proud of my service to this country. And I firmly believe you should never denigrate another person's service record. To anyone brave enough to put on that uniform for our great country, including my opponent, I just have a few simple words. Thank you for your service and sacrifice.
We're back with Colonel Jacobs, General McCaffrey, Amy, and Paul. Amy, we've had this rolling conversation that I think gets really close to this nerve, right? That if you believe in your country and you serve your country, it's something extra, it's something better than the rest of us. To see a candidate for president say, no, it's not. This one's better. This medal for this person who never served is better. It's so disorienting. It almost doesn't have, it almost scrambles the circuits. And I wonder, from your view, from your perch, from your service, from your active role in our politics, what the appropriate sort of response is to someone who sees the world and sees service in our military that way.
Well, first of all, when I heard about it last night, I mean, I was shocked, just the same way, anybody watching that would be shocked. Even after all of these years of watching Trump, I was shocked. And
yeah.
In no planet is it okay to say that a medal that you gave to your rich donor is better than or even the same as the Medal of Honor. And I think, it just shows this total lack of understanding of what it means to be commander-in-chief, a total lack of understanding of the culture of the United States military, the culture of the greatest fighting force that's ever been around on this planet. And it just, I think about it as Donald Trump is not even fit to be in the room with Colonel Jacobs.
Amy, we've talked a lot about how impactful Chairman Milley would be or Secretary Mattis would be. And I've been unsparing in my enthusiasm for them to step into the public arena. I heard this comment yesterday, and I really have a different layer of understanding about how painful it must have been to serve someone who wanted his generals, and he, make no mistake, I mean, he didn't view them as American heroes the way the public did, the way most people, he viewed them as my generals. General Kelly was his general, and in Trump's mind was subservient to him, not in the chain of command, but in the way someone that worked at one of his clubs is. That's how Trump saw these men and women. There weren't a lot of women at that high level. But, Amy, I wonder if it's just too painful to sort of relive what it was like to work for someone who wanted his generals to be more like the Germans. And when General Kelly pressed him about which Germans, it was clear he meant Nazis. About what it was like for him to denigrate the service of General Kelly's own son, who paid the ultimate price for our country. I just wonder if this comment yesterday deepens our understanding of why some of those men don't want to weigh into our politics.
Well, I think some have, and General Kelly, as was brought out earlier, has said, look, Donald Trump said these things. So I do think that some have come out. Would I wish for General Mattis and some others to come forward a little bit more? Yeah, I would. And I can't speak as to the reasons why they haven't. But a number of people have. And I do believe that, we should listen to them. And we should continue to talk about this because it is important. It is important for our country. I mean, how can we have a commander-in-chief who fundamentally does not understand the nation's highest honor and the sacrifices and what it all means? It's not an honor, as Trump said, given to people who have been shot or injured. Yes, there are some that have been injured and shot, getting or earning that medal, but it's a medal for bravery. It's a medal for when you jump on a grenade to help your buddies, to save their lives. It's a medal as you're a pilot for going back, you're taking your machine back into battle where you could be shot down and killed in order to save someone else. That's what this medal is about. And Donald Trump has no clue about that, or he never would have made these comments.
Paul Rieckhoff, it is also important to view it as a continuum. His affinity for Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un and Viktor Orban is of a piece with his disdain for the military and military service. Because if you love our adversaries and enemies, you don't understand that American men and women, generations of them, paid with their lives for us to live a totally different way of life here in a free democracy. Just talk about what these comments revealed for you, if anything.
This is who Donald Trump is. He's been this guy from the beginning. He can't change who he is, and he's doubling down on it over and over again. And he's so arrogant that he doesn't even back off. I mean, I'm honored to be on a panel with these heroes, and I'm glad you read Colonel Jack Jacobs' citation. Everyone should read it. I'd tell Donald Trump to read it, but it probably wouldn't matter because this is a giant teachable moment, right? That's the upside here, is that now everybody watching, especially young people, are going to better understand what the Medal of Honor means, what freedom really means, what leadership means. And what leadership means is sacrifice. And that's what Donald Trump is unwilling to do. And that's why Orban and Putin and everyone else are celebrating him. Our enemies are celebrating when they see a former commander-in-chief attack our military. And he's done it over and over again. He's done it to Milley. He's done it to John McCain. He's done it in so many ways. And even if it's not malicious or it's an attempt to undermine our government, it's sloppy and it's unacceptable and it's weird. And I think it's really now moved beyond being about just Trump. We know who he is. The question now is for the Americans who are on the fence. This is not just about him. It's about you. Are you okay with a guy being our commander-in-chief who thinks that way about people like Jack Jacobs and about people like Buddy Bucha, who we just lost a couple weeks ago, and people like Sal Junta? Because if he feels that way about a Medal of Honor recipient, how do you think he feels about you as an average person somewhere in Ohio or Pennsylvania and Florida? I think that's the deeper conversation we have to have here, because if he feels that way about our country's superheroes, he feels that way, and probably even worse, about the everyman and everywoman.
So again, to all of us, I would say, in the spirit of the great Senator John McCain, please Please join me in putting country over party and stopping Donald Trump and protecting the rule of law, protecting our Constitution, and protecting the democracy of this great country.
It feels as if the four corners of the Harris Wall's big tent expanded in that moment and continue to expand by the hour in order to accommodate an ever larger, ever more animated and determined pro-democracy coalition. One diverse, in some cases averse on matters of policy, but one united in purpose and in recognizing this moment. That is to prevent a coup-plotting wannabe dictator from ever setting foot into the Oval Office ever again. The outer reaches of that alliance continues to grow even today. We're talking about lifelong Republicans putting country over party. You heard from Mesa, Arizona Mayor John Giles. Now welcome former Congresswoman Susan Molinari, a Staten Island Republican, to the party. Molinari telling New York One that she believes Kamala Harris is smart, strong, knows how to handle herself on the world stage. And, oh yeah, quote, she's not crazy, she adds. A simple yet potent argument, and one evidently gaining steam among those who wouldn't otherwise vote for a Democratic nominee. Joining us now, Republican Mayor of Mesa, Arizona, the aforementioned John Giles, and former senior advisor to Vice President Mike Pence, member of the Republicans for Harris. Our old friend Olivia Choi is here. Mr. Mayor, you gave a tremendous speech. I played it yesterday. I was happy to get to play it again today on the occasion of your being here. This is not an original thought, but I saw it pointed out that if you had said something about John McCain at a Trump rally, people would not have clapped and applauded. And that, having had the privilege of working for him, made me emotional. I mean, to see that the pro-democracy movement, and to give credit to the Democratic coalition for letting folks like us into it. I mean, you had an incredibly enthusiastic reception there. Just tell me what this has been like to be this messenger.
Well, I'm a big fan of Senator McCain's as well. I worked for him as an intern when I was in law school back when he was Congressman John McCain. And he was very kind to me. I've been the mayor for 10 years. So the first, 6 or 7 years, 5 or 6 years of that, I got to work with Senator McCain as well. So it is painful to see the way that he is treated by the Republican Party now. It's shameful. And that's part of what motivates me to speak up. I generally try to avoid partisan fights. It's not necessarily productive to my goal of being a good mayor, but occasionally you have to wade into these waters. And defending the good name of John McCain is a cause that I'm anxious to be involved in.
And I love the spontaneous applause. You didn't even stop for the applause. It just erupted. I want to ask you what conversations you're having, not in front of thousands and thousands of people, but what are your sort of private persuasion messages to Republicans?
Well, there's been a lot of them. I was stopped yesterday in the gym by a couple of young men who had concerns. They were watching a lot of Fox News, and they were telling me they could never afford to buy a house now. And what am I thinking? Why am I becoming a Democrat? And there's multiply that by thousands, all over our country. I think it's easy sometimes to forget that this country remains very evenly divided, and there are a lot of folks that are misinformed, and that are, I think it's important that Vice President Harris continue to run like she's behind, because underestimating Donald Trump is something that we do at our own peril. So we do need to engage in the gyms and in the grocery store lines and at churches and everywhere, and try to overcome some of the conservative propaganda that's out there, preaching that Vice President Harris is an existential threat to our country. We need to get good information out to people, and again, run like we're behind.
Olivia Choi, one of the places where the disinformation that Trump spews and Vance parrots, and Fox News has actually paid millions of dollars for their role in disseminating on behalf of Donald Trump, is about the sanctity of our elections. It's what brought sort of the first high-profile Republican, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, to the side of being Republican lightning rods on the pro-democracy side. What is your sense of how much is achievable?
Look, Nicole, I'm inspired. I'm actually inspired by the conversations, and I'm inspired by the mayor who's having those conversations with the Fox News watchers, because I think that is what needs to happen. We need to be reaching these voters and having these just one-on-one conversations with them on the center-right side. And I think, I was in Michigan with the vice president last month. I saw her extend that olive branch to Republican women and conservative women in that moment. And I saw her speak in a way that was, empathetic and impactful and understanding of how conservatives differ on the views. But I also saw her say, hey, you are welcome as part of this coalition. And I think that's what Republicans for Harris is trying to do. We are saying, we don't all have to be agreeing on everything. But the one thing we agree on is that we want a better future for our country. We want to strengthen our democracy. And also, we want a better future for the Republican Party. And the best way to do that is by defeating Donald Trump.
When we come back, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer is here. She joins the program, one of the Democratic Party's biggest stars and the governor of a must-win swing state, on how to take on Donald Trump.
In this election, we have two very different candidates. One is a prosecutor, the other is a convicted felon. One, a vice president who believes in reproductive freedom, or the guy who stacked the court with the people who ripped away Roe. We're not going back, right? Say it with me, we're not going back. When we, Michigan, elect Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, we can wake up on November 6th, the day after the election, and say for the first time, Madam President.
Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer at a Harris-Walz rally in her home state, firing up the crowd and laying out the oh-so-sharp contrast between Vice President Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. It's no surprise that Governor Whitmer is so effective at making the case against Trump. She's had to deal with him plenty, like during the COVID-19 pandemic when she called him out for leaving states like hers to fend for themselves. And he responded by disparagingly referring to her as, quote, that woman from Michigan. Or as she puts it in her fantastic new book, True Gretch, quote, politics can feel like blood sport these days. Luckily for me, we Whitmers have a thick skin and a short memory. We're good at turning insults into humor and quick to laugh at ourselves. And that's the best way to disarm bullies. You can trust me on this, or I'm not that woman from Michigan. Joining our conversation, the aforementioned governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer's here. She's the author of True Gretch, What I've Learned About Life, Leadership, and Everything in Between. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Nicole. I'm glad to be with you.
There's so much political news to get to, but I want to start with the book. It's different for a political memoir. It's your sort of signature realness, and I want to just dive right in. I'm gonna read from this incredibly powerful section. You write, in 2013, I was serving as Michigan's Senate Minority Leader. That year, the Republicans tried to push through a bill requiring women in Michigan to buy extra health insurance for abortion coverage, even in cases of rape or incest. My staff and I prepared a speech for me to give on the Senate floor. I delivered my remarks as deliberately and forcefully as possible, letting my anger show. In the back of my mind, though, my thoughts were spinning. For 23 years, I had pushed down the awful memory of what happened to me in college. I never in my life imagined talking about it in a public forum. Yet suddenly, in the course of one short speech with TV cameras rolling, I had to decide whether to reveal my deepest secret to the world. Once it was out, there was no turning back. Let me play that moment for everyone, too.
I shared with many people in my life. But over 20 years ago, I was a victim of rape. And thank God it didn't result in a pregnancy. Because I can't imagine going through what I went through and then having to consider what to do about an unwanted pregnancy from an attacker. And as a mother with 2 girls, the thought that they would ever go through something like I did keeps me up at night. How extreme does this measure need to be? I'm not the only woman in our state that has faced that horrible circumstance. But I think you need to see the face of the women that you are impacting by this vote today.
If you are the most powerful person in the world or not, it is the most excruciating thing to talk about. Do you still find it extraordinary that on that day, all those years ago, you mustered the strength to tell this story?
Yeah, I got to tell you, just even watching the old clip, you know, I can feel my heart in my throat. Like I feel it once again. And yet,
me too.
I tell that story in the book because 10 years later, as governor, I got to sign the repeal of that legislation. And so that part of the book it's a chapter titled Never Give Up. It took 10 years, longer than it should have. But these fights are worth waging. We can win them. And that's what this book is about, putting some light out in the world in a heavy, hard time and trying to give people a little inspiration, or maybe you get a laugh at my expense. I tell some kind of interesting things about myself I've never shared before, or maybe just some light reading. But I feel hopeful now, and never giving up is a part of that philosophy.
Say more about feeling hopeful now.
I got to tell you, you know, as it's understandable that Americans might want to check out. It's been a hard 6 years, from the pandemic to the political rhetoric to all the heavy stuff we've been navigating. And yet I find when I actually roll up my sleeves and get more active is when I feel more hopeful. Getting into and listening to people, connecting with people. You know, listening is, I think, a superpower, and not enough people do it, especially politicians. And so as I see Kamala Harris and Tim Walz as the standard bearers of the Democratic Party now, I know that these are regular people, middle-class folks who understand how to solve problems, and that gives me hope. And I see the energy that is happening right now. I'm sober. It's still going to be hard, and Michigan is going to be in the center of it all. But I am hopeful, and I think it's seeing my fellow Americans and working with people who actually want to solve problems like Harris and Walz.
You know, after Trump won in 2016, I spent a lot of time in Michigan talking to 2-time voters for President Obama who had left the Democratic Party and supported Trump. And so much of what they wanted from him, he did not deliver on. And it's sort of remarkable that the Republican Party nominated him a 3rd time. Can you tell me what the political fight is? What are the voters that are going to be most contested, and where do you think the race stands today?
Well, Michigan is a microcosm of the country, and you know, we are the most diverse of all the swing states. I was raised in a household, and I talk a little bit about this in the book too. My dad was a Republican, a traditional Republican, maybe a Nicole Wallace Republican, and my mother was a Democrat. And you know, it was a different time. We could have differences, but agree on the facts and have different perspectives on those facts. If we stayed centered on values and solving problems, we wouldn't get so angry we'd walk away from the table and not have Thanksgiving together. You know, it was a different time. And I do think it's really important that we're making space at the table for people who aren't totally bought into the Democratic agenda, but can see someone who is actually genuinely trying to solve problems and make their lives better. We had Republicans for Harris here in Michigan. I think that's really important. I didn't win Michigan by almost 11 points without pulling a lot of people over the political aisle, Republicans and independents. I value that, and I know that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz do too, and I know that work is being done here on the ground.
I mean, it's interesting that you sort of pull out. I mean, there are a lot of reasons why you are one of the most beloved politicians in the country right now. You point to the ability to listen. One of the people you want to listen to is the plotters of your own planned kidnapping and attack. Tell me about that. You write about that in the book as well.
You know, when I wrote that, I didn't know that that would strike people as unusual, to be honest. I want to learn. You know, whether it is reproductive freedom fight that we had last fall or in 22 going into an important election where we amended our Constitution, or it is simply understanding where Michiganders are. What can I do to make your lives better? Fix the damn roads is what I'm known for. It's from asking that question over again and then asking a follow-up question. Why is that so important to you? It's about paying the rent. It's about child care. It's about getting to work on time. So I do think that listening is so important. These plotters, let's see, not a usual reaction to a governor telling you to wear a mask. We have 330 million people in this country. 14 wanted to kill their governor for telling them to wear a mask. Why? What was really going on in their lives? Is there something I can learn that'll make me a better governor or a better human being? Maybe it wouldn't be a good use of my time, but I'd like to try because I see every problem as an opportunity to do more, to do better, and to help someone.
This has been Primetime Weekend. I'm Nicole Wallace. Please tune into Deadline White House and all of our primetime shows weekdays on MSNBC.